In the New Mexico Territory of 1885, a weathered ranch house stood like a sentinel against the endless sweep of the high desert. Inside, Thomas Blackhawk moved through rooms haunted by silence, his mixed Apache heritage etched into the stern lines of his face. The townsfolk of Cottonwood Springs spoke of him in whispers. They said the war had changed him, that he was a man who trusted no one. They called him dangerous. They called him broken. When a persistent fever stole her mother's strength, 22-year-old Hannah Miller had to take her place cleaning the Blackhawk Ranch. With little more than a fierce determination and her mother's warnings echoing in her mind, she stepped into the solitary world of the man everyone feared. But in the quiet spaces between sweeping floors and silent observation, between duty and the breaking dawn, something wholly unexpected began to take root. Hannah wrung out a cloth over a basin, the water turning a faint, cloudy pink as she dabbed her mother's feverish forehead. The small cabin they called home felt fragile against the April wind that whistled through its imperfect seams. "You should rest, Mama," Hannah whispered, tucking the thin blanket tighter around Eliza's frail shoulders. "The Blackhawk place." Eliza's voice was barely a rasp. "You'll need to go tomorrow. We can't afford to lose the income." Hannah nodded, a chill tracing its way down her spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. "I know. I'll manage." From the window she could see the distant silhouette of the ranch against the pale sky. For 3 years, her mother had made the journey twice a week, returning with enough money to keep them from starving after her father's death in a mine collapse. Now, with Eliza bedridden for a month, their meager savings had all but vanished. The medicine bottle on the bedside table was nearly empty. "Be careful there, child," Eliza murmured, her eyes fluttering open. "People say things about that man." "What things, Mama?" "That he's dangerous. That he came back from the war a different person." A fit of coughing seized her, and Hannah quickly helped her take a sip of water. "Mrs. Porter at the general store," Eliza continued in a whisper. "She says he keeps to himself because he's hiding something terrible. They say his white wife died under mysterious circumstances." Hannah had heard the gossip, the cruel speculation that clung to Thomas Blackhawk like a shadow. She'd seen him in town, a tall, imposing figure with a face like carved stone, who ignored the stares and muttered comments as he conducted his business and left. "Mrs. Porter says a lot of things," Hannah replied, more sharply than she intended. Half the town would starve if she couldn't feast on gossip. A weak smile touched her mother's lips. "You sound just like your father." She reached for Hannah's hand, her fingers as cold and light as bird bones. "Just promise me you'll be careful. Don't be alone with him more than you have to be." "I promise, Mama." Hannah squeezed her hand gently. "Now, please rest." Later, a soft knock at the door announced Dr. Wallace. His kindness was one of the few blessings they had left. He examined Eliza with a gentle efficiency, his expression growing graver by the moment. Afterwards, he beckoned Hannah outside onto the porch. "The medicine isn't working as I'd hoped," he said quietly. "She needs the surgery, Miss Miller. Without it—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. "How much?" Hannah asked, her voice surprisingly steady. $50. He named a sum that might as well have been 500. Hannah gave a slow nod, her gaze fixed on the distant ranch. "I'll find a way," she said, clutching the cleaning apron she would wear tomorrow. Her mother's life depended on it. Dawn had barely kissed the eastern hills when Hannah reached the Blackhawk gate. The 2-mile walk had been lonely in the half-light. The crunch of her boots on the dusty road, the only sound besides the distant howl of a coyote. The house loomed larger as she approached, a substantial structure of weathered wood and stone that now wore a mantle of neglect. Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the back door as her mother had instructed. There was no answer. She knocked again, louder. When silence was her only reply, she tried the handle and found it unlocked. Steeling her nerves, she pushed the door open and stepped into a large, austere kitchen. A cast-iron stove stood cold. A simple wooden table was flanked by 2 chairs, and mismatched dishes lined open shelves. "Hello?" she called out, her voice sounding small and thin. "Mr. Blackhawk?" A floorboard creaked overhead, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps descending a staircase. A moment later, his presence filled the doorway. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a simple white shirt and dark trousers held up by suspenders. His black hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back from a face of sharp angles and high cheekbones. But it was his eyes that held her, deep-set, dark, and utterly unreadable. They fixed on her, and for a long moment, he simply stared. "You're not," he began, his voice a low baritone. "No, sir," Hannah said, forcing her spine straight. "I'm Hannah Miller, Eliza's daughter. My mother is ill. I've come to clean in her place." Over the next few weeks, Hannah settled into a routine. She would arrive just after dawn to find the house empty, Thomas already out tending his horses. She learned to start the coffee immediately, timing it so its rich aroma filled the kitchen just as his boots sounded on the back porch. He rarely spoke more than a quiet morning, but she saw how his shoulders lost some of their tension as he wrapped his hands around the warm cup she set before him. She moved through the quiet house with a growing sense of familiarity. She dusted the shelves in his study, surprised to find worn volumes of Whitman and Thoreau next to books in Spanish she couldn't read. They spoke of a mind more complex than the town's gossip would allow. One morning, the sound of uneven footsteps on the porch brought her to the kitchen door. Thomas entered, limping slightly. Cupped in his large, calloused hands was a tiny, injured rabbit. "Coyote got the mother," he said, his voice rough with disuse. "Found this one still alive." Hannah watched, captivated, as he gently placed the trembling creature in a box lined with rags. His fingers, powerful enough to break a horse, moved with an astonishing delicacy as he examined the rabbit's wounds. "Will it live?" she asked softly. He straightened, his gaze meeting hers for a fleeting second. "If it's strong enough. Sometimes the ones that seem most fragile have the strongest will to survive." He turned away. "I'll need warm water and some clean cloth." Hannah hurried to do as he asked. When she returned, he was grinding herbs from a small leather pouch, mixing them into a paste. "My mother uses healing plants, too," she offered quietly, "for fevers and such." He gave only a slight nod, his focus on his work. Yet, as she leaned in to watch, he didn't send her away. He showed her how to hold the small creature steady while he gently applied the herbal salve to its wounds. Their hands brushed, and Hannah was suddenly aware of his nearness, of the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. When they finished, he straightened up, the little rabbit now breathing steadily in its box. "Thank you," he said, the words low and deliberate, as if they cost him some great effort. A small smile touched Hannah's lips. "You're welcome, Mr. Blackhawk." He looked at her, a long, searching look that made her heart beat faster. Thomas. Asima, he said after a moment. Call me Thomas. The name hung in the air between them, a small but significant offering. Thomas, she repeated softly. That evening, Hannah found her mother sitting up in bed, a little color having returned to her cheeks. The Blackhawk place, Eliza said, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Is he cruel to you, child? Hannah thought of the man's gentle hands tending to the smallest of creatures, of the unexpected softness in his voice. She thought of the lonely books on his shelves and the sorrow she was beginning to see behind his guarded eyes. No, Mama, she answered, the truth of it settling deep in her soul. He's not what they say at all. As she banked the fire for the night, Hannah realized something had shifted within her. The fear she had carried to the ranch had given way to a profound curiosity, and perhaps something more. That night, she dreamt not of a dangerous shadow, but of dark, quiet eyes that held more sorrow than malice, and of large, gentle hands capable of mending the most fragile of broken things. The study needed organizing. Thomas had mentioned it offhandedly the previous week, and Hannah had finally worked up the courage to tackle the cluttered room. Dust motes danced in the late morning sunlight as she sorted through stacks of papers, agricultural journals, and correspondence. Behind the desk, a wooden crate held what appeared to be personal items. Hannah hesitated, knowing she should probably leave it untouched, but its tarnished metal frame peeking from beneath a folded American flag caught her eye. Almost without thinking, she lifted it. The photograph showed a younger Thomas in what appeared to be a Union Army Scout's uniform, standing beside a white officer. His face was leaner then, without the lines that now marked his features, but his eyes held the same private, guarded expression. What is that? Hannah started, nearly dropping the frame. Thomas stood in the doorway, his jaw tight with anger. I'm sorry, she said quickly, returning the photograph to the crate. I was organizing and You were prying. His voice was cold. Hannah straightened her back. I apologize for touching your personal belongings, but I wasn't prying. I was doing what you asked, putting things in order. For a long moment, they stood in tense silence. Then, unexpectedly, Thomas's expression softened slightly. No one touches those things, he said, more quietly. Not since... He stopped himself. Since Rebecca? Hannah asked gently. His eyes narrowed. What do you know about Rebecca? Only what people say in town. That she was your wife. That she died. Thomas moved to the window, looking out at the distant hills. People say many things, few of them true. Hannah should have left it there, should have excused herself and returned to safer tasks. Instead, she found herself asking, what is the truth then? He turned, studying her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. Why do you want to know? Because... Hannah searched for an answer that wouldn't reveal too much of her growing feelings. Because I've learned not to trust what people in town say. About others. Or about me. Something shifted in his expression. What do they say about you? That I'm a fool to work here. That I'm risking my reputation. Hannah smiled faintly. That I should accept James Porter's attentions instead of... She stopped, flushing. Instead of cleaning for an Apache, Thomas finished flatly. That's not what I was going to say, Hannah replied, meeting his gaze. And you know it. The tension between them vibrated like a plucked string. Then Thomas spoke, the sound carrying the weight of years. I was a scout, he said, gesturing to the photograph. For the Union Army. I believed I was helping to end the war sooner. His voice turned bitter. Instead, I helped them find my mother's people. I didn't know that was their purpose until it was too late. Hannah remained silent, sensing he needed to continue without interruption. After the war, I came here to start over. Met Rebecca Thornton. Her father had been my commanding officer. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She was stubborn, determined to marry me despite everything. You loved her, Hannah said softly. Yes. The word came out rough, as if dragged from somewhere deep. We had 3 good years before. He turned away again. I lost my father, Hannah offered, crossing the invisible boundary between employer and employee. 3 years ago, a mine accident. The supports gave way, and 16 men were trapped. They dug for 2 days, but when they reached them, her voice broke. I'm sorry, Thomas said, and she knew he meant it. My mother never recovered from the shock. Her health began failing soon after. Hannah twisted her hands in her apron. That's why I need this job so badly. The doctor says she needs surgery, but it costs more than we could ever save. Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. $50. Hannah looked up, surprised. How did you know? Wallace's usual fee. He reached for a ledger on his desk. I've been meaning to organize my accounts. It would be additional work, additional pay. Their eyes met, and Hannah understood. He was offering help in the only way she could accept it. Thank you, she said simply. As she turned to leave, Thomas spoke again. Hannah? She paused at the door. The photograph. I was trying to do what was right. I've spent every day since wondering if I succeeded. Hannah nodded, recognizing the confession for the rare gift it was. The first piece of his closely guarded soul, offered freely to her. Sunday morning found Hannah in her faded blue dress, slipping into the back pew of Cottonwood Springs' whitewashed church just as Reverend Collins began his sermon. Her friend Sarah Parker, the schoolteacher, slid closer to make room. You missed last week, Sarah whispered, concern evident in her hazel eyes. Mother had a bad night, Hannah replied, though in truth she'd spent Sunday morning organizing Thomas's account books while he rode the property boundaries. The sermon droned on, something about Pharisees and judgment that seemed pointed in its timing. Hannah felt the weight of sideways glances and whispers. When the final hymn concluded, she tried to make a quick exit, but Sarah caught her arm. Coffee at the Warrens? Everyone's going. Hannah hesitated. I should get back to Mother. Please, Sarah insisted. People are talking, Hannah. You need to be seen socializing properly. Before Hannah could respond, James Porter approached, his Sunday suit immaculate, his smile confident. Miss Miller, he said with a slight bow. You're looking well. How is your mother's health? Improving, thank you, Hannah replied politely. Splendid news. Perhaps you'll join us at the town meeting this afternoon. Father has an important announcement regarding the future of Cottonwood Springs. The conversation around them quieted as people strained to listen. What announcement? Sarah asked. James straightened, clearly pleased to have an audience. Father has secured backing from Eastern investors to expand our cattle operation. We'll be the largest ranch in the territory by year's end. That's wonderful news, Sarah said. Isn't it, Hannah? Hannah nodded absently, her mind on Thomas's ranch, which bordered Porter land to the north. Will you be acquiring new property? James's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. We'll be consolidating several smaller holdings, yes. The water rights are essential for our expansion. Including the Blackhawk Ranch? Hannah asked directly. A hush fell over the nearby churchgoers. James's expression hardened. That land rightfully belongs with those who can use it properly, he said, his voice low. Not with a half-breed who barely runs 50 head of cattle on 2,000 acres. James, Sarah gasped. Hannah felt heat rise to her face. Mr. Blackhawk's heritage doesn't diminish his right to his property. Rights, James scoffed. An Apache claiming rights to American soil? My father fought Indians in the Arizona campaign. He knows what they're capable of. And I suppose you do too? Hannah challenged, forgetting the watching crowd. James leaned closer. I know that you spend an awful lot of time alone with him, Miss Miller. People wonder what exactly you're cleaning over there. The insinuation hung in the air like gin smoke. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. James Porter, you take that back, Hannah demanded, her voice shaking. Hannah, Sarah pleaded. He didn't mean, he meant exactly what he said, Hannah interrupted. And in the house of God, no less. She turned to leave but found Reverend Collins blocking her path, his expression stern beneath bushy white eyebrows. Miss Miller, he said quietly, a word, please. In his small office, the Reverend's concern seemed genuine. Your mother was a pillar of this church before her illness. She'd be distressed to hear such talk about you. Talk based on lies, Hannah said firmly. Nevertheless, he steepled his fingers, a young, unmarried woman in your position must be beyond reproach, perhaps alternative employment. There is no alternative, Reverend. My mother needs surgery. A knock interrupted them. Dr. Wallace entered, his expression grave. Hannah, I've just come from your mother. The fever's returned. We can't wait much longer for the surgery. The Reverend's face softened. Go, child. We'll speak another time. Outside, Hannah nearly collided with James Porter, who was examining a notice on the church bulletin board. Town meeting, he said, as if their previous exchange had never happened. 4 o'clock. You should come. After all, what happens to the Blackhawk Ranch will affect your employment situation. Hannah hurried past him, but not before catching sight of the notice, an official announcement of water rights claims being reviewed by the territorial authorities. Thomas's name was prominently listed. As she rushed home to her mother, Hannah realized that more than her reputation was at stake. Thomas's entire livelihood hung in the balance, and somehow her fate had become entwined with his. She wondered if he even knew the storm that was coming. Hannah sat at her mother's bedside, watching the shallow rise and fall of Eliza's chest. The fever had weakened her further, leaving her skin translucent, veined like fine china. Dr. Wallace had left more medicine, but his parting look had been grave. We've waited too long, he'd murmured. In the dim light of dawn, Hannah opened the small wooden box where she kept their few valuables. Her fingers found the smooth gold band that had been her father's final gift to her mother on their 20th anniversary, just months before the mine collapse. Eliza had insisted Hannah keep it safe after she became ill. For your own wedding day someday. Now Hannah slipped it into her pocket, her decision made. When she reached town, Mr. Finch's pawn shop was just opening. The old man's eyebrows rose in recognition. Miss Miller, he said, watching her place the ring on his counter. Your mother's. Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He examined it, holding it to the light. $10, he offered. It's worth 30 at least, Hannah protested. It's solid gold. 15 then. Times are hard for everyone. With $40 already saved from her work at the ranch, Hannah needed that ring to fetch more. Please, Mr. Finch. My mother needs surgery. Something in her desperation must have reached him. 20, that's my final offer. 20 wasn't enough, but it was all she would get. Hannah nodded, blinking back tears as he counted out the bills. You can buy it back within 30 days, he said, more gently. Same price. Outside, Hannah stood in the morning sun, the money clutched in her hand, still $30 short of what Dr. Wallace required. She considered asking for an advance from Thomas, but pride stopped her. She'd already accepted his additional work organizing the accounts. When she arrived at the ranch later that morning, her eyes were still red-rimmed, despite her efforts to compose herself. Thomas looked up from his coffee as she entered, his gaze sharpening at her appearance. What's wrong? He asked, the direct question unexpected. Hannah shook her head, reaching for her apron. Nothing, Mr. Blackhawk. I'll start on the kitchen. Thomas, he corrected quietly. Then, you've been crying. The simple observation, stated without judgment, broke something inside her. Tears she'd been holding back spilled down her cheeks. My mother's worse, she managed. The doctor says she needs the surgery now, but I'm still $30 short. Her hand went unconsciously to her pocket, where the ring had been. I sold my mother's wedding ring this morning. Thomas was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he stood, moving to a small lockbox on a high shelf. He unlocked it, counted out bills, and placed them on the table between them. $30. An advance on your wages. Hannah stared at the money, shame and gratitude warring within her. I can't accept that. It will take months to work it off. Then you'll work for months, he said simply. Why would you do this? She asked, searching his face. Thomas looked away, his profile silhouetted against the morning light. I know what it is to lose someone you love and be powerless to prevent it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. Rebecca? Hannah asked softly. A muscle tightened in his jaw. She died in childbirth. Our son with her. His voice was flat, as if the emotion had been bled out of it long ago. There was no doctor within 50 miles. I tried everything I knew, every remedy my mother had taught me. He trailed off. Hannah reached across the table, her hand covering his before she could think better of it. His skin was warm, calloused from years of ranch work. I'm so sorry, she whispered. He looked down at their hands, then slowly turned his palm upward, his fingers curling around hers. The gesture was tentative, as if he'd forgotten the simple human comfort of touch. Take the money, he said. Save your mother. Hannah nodded, unable to speak. When she finally withdrew her hand to gather the bills, the imprint of his touch lingered, warm against her skin. Thank you, she said, meeting his eyes. I won't forget this. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding deeper than words, a connection formed in shared pain and unexpected kindness. As Hannah left to bring the money to Dr. Wallace, she knew that nothing between them would be the same again. Dark clouds gathered on the western horizon as Hannah finished polishing the dining room table, Her mother's surgery was scheduled for tomorrow, Dr. Wallace having agreed to perform it as soon as Hannah produced the full payment. The doctor was staying with her mother now, monitoring her condition while Hannah completed her work at the ranch. "Storm's coming," Thomas said from the doorway, startling her. "You should head back before it hits." Hannah moved to the window. The approaching clouds were an ominous blue-black, roiling with internal lightning. "Will it be bad?" "Spring storms can be." Thomas was already gathering his oilskin coat. "I need to secure the horses and check the creek. It floods easily." Hannah glanced at the grandfather clock in the hall. "I'll help before I go." Thomas looked as if he might object, then nodded. "Stay close." Outside, the wind had already picked up, bending the tall grass in rippling waves. They worked quickly, methodically, Thomas leading nervous horses into the barn, while Hannah secured doors and shutters. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the first fat raindrops began to fall as they finished. "The creek," Thomas said, gesturing toward the property's eastern boundary. "I need to check if the crossing is still passable. It's your way home." They hurried toward the creek together, the rain now falling steadily. By the time they reached it, the normally placid creek had already risen, brown water churning angrily over rocks that usually stood well above the surface. Thomas surveyed it grimly. "Not safe to cross. It will only get worse." A jagged bolt of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Hannah flinched involuntarily, and Thomas placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We need to get back to the house," he shouted over the rising wind. They were halfway back when Hannah spotted it. A section of fence near the corral had come loose, panels flapping dangerously in the wind. Without hesitation, she veered toward it. "The fence will injure the horses if it breaks free," she called to Thomas, who had turned to follow her. Together, they fought to secure the heavy wooden panels. Rain plastered Hannah's hair to her face as she braced herself against the wind, holding the fence steady while Thomas hammered a post back into place. His movements were swift and sure despite his slight limp in the driving rain. When the last panel was secured, Thomas nodded toward the barn rather than the house. It was closer. They ran the remaining distance, bursting through the doors as another lightning strike illuminated the world in stark white. Inside, the barn was dim but dry, smelling of hay and horses. Thomas lit a lantern while Hannah caught her breath, pushing wet hair from her face. "You're shivering," he observed, shrugging out of his coat and offering it to her. "So are you," she countered, but accepted the coat, wrapping it around her shoulders. It enveloped her in warmth and his scent, leather, tobacco, and something distinctly his own. "You handled yourself well out there," Thomas said, his voice gruff with what might have been approval. "Most women would have panicked." Hannah smiled slightly. "My father taught me that falling apart during a crisis helps no one." Thomas nodded, striking a match to light the small stove kept in the barn for cold mornings. "Wise man, your father." "He was." Hannah moved closer to the growing warmth. "He came west with nothing but hope and the willingness to work hard. Even when the mine failed to make him rich, he never became bitter." "Unlike some," Thomas said quietly. Hannah studied his profile in the lamplight. "You're not bitter. Wounded, perhaps." "There's the difference." His eyes met hers, surprise evident in them. "Most would disagree." "Most don't know you," she replied simply. The storm raged outside, rain hammering against the roof. Inside, a different kind of storm was brewing, one made of shared glances and unspoken words. "I learned ranching from an old Mexican vaquero named Joaquin," Thomas said suddenly, stoking the small fire. "After the war, when I had nowhere to belong. He didn't care about my blood, only that I worked hard and learned quickly. Hannah settled on a hay bale, drawing his coat tighter around her. Tell me more. As the storm howled outside, Thomas's deep voice filled the barn with stories of his past, of Joaquin's wisdom, of cattle drives and wild horses, of building the ranch with his own hands. Hannah listened, watching his face in the lamplight, seeing the man emerging from behind the careful mask he showed the world. By the time the worst of the storm had passed, something fundamental had shifted between them. A broken fence mended, a boundary crossed. Morning arrived clear and brilliant after the storm, the world washed clean. Hannah had spent the night in Thomas's spare room, too exhausted after the ordeal to worry about impropriety. Now she stood at the kitchen window, watching the sunrise over puddles that reflected the sky like scattered mirrors. Thomas entered quietly, his footsteps hesitant in a way she hadn't heard before. When she turned, she found him holding a small brass key. "I want to show you something," he said, his voice low. "If you're willing." Hannah nodded, curious. She followed him up the stairs to the second floor, to the locked room at the end of the hall, the room she'd wondered about since her first day. At the door, Thomas paused, turning the key in his palm as if weighing a decision already made. "No one has entered this room in 5 years," he said. "Not since I carried her out." Hannah's heart quickened. "Rebecca's room?" "Yes." The key slid into the lock with a soft click. The door opened on silent hinges. Dust motes danced in the shaft of morning light that fell across a room preserved in time. A 4-poster bed stood against one wall, its quilt smoothed as if waiting for its occupant's return. A silver-backed hairbrush lay on the dressing table beside a porcelain basin. By the window sat a rocking chair, a half-finished piece of embroidery still stretched on its hoop. Thomas remained in the doorway as Hannah stepped inside, feeling like an intruder in this quiet shrine to his grief. "She was the daughter of my commanding officer," Thomas said, his voice distant. "Captain Thornton. A good man, despite everything. When I left the army, he offered me work on his ranch in Colorado. That's where I met Rebecca." Hannah ran her fingers lightly over the hairbrush, the silver cool beneath her touch. "She was different," Thomas continued, his gaze lost in the past. "She saw people for who they were, not what they were. When we fell in love, her father opposed it at first. Not because of my Apache blood, surprisingly, but because he feared how others would treat her for marrying me." "He was right to worry," Hannah said softly. Thomas nodded. "We moved here to start fresh, built this place together." His eyes swept the room, a landscape of memory. "She was carrying our first child when the fever took her. 3 days of suffering, and I could do nothing." His voice broke just for a moment. "Nothing but watch them both slip away." Hannah's throat tightened with a shared, unspoken pain. "So you locked away your heart, just like this room." It seemed safer. Hannah moved to the small bookshelf beside the bed. A leather-bound journal lay among the other books, a ribbon marker protruding from its pages. "May I?" At Thomas's nod, she opened it. The pages were filled with elegant, flowing handwriting, poetry, observations, delicate sketches of the ranch. It was the inner life of a woman she would never meet, but whose absence had shaped the very man who stood before her. "She sounds remarkable," Hannah said, carefully returning the journal to its place. "She was." Thomas stepped fully into the room at last, moving to the dresser. He opened a small wooden box and removed something that caught the light. This was hers, he said, holding out a simple silver brooch shaped like a wild rose. She would have wanted someone to wear it again. Hannah shook her head. Thomas, I couldn't possibly. Please, he said. The single word carried the weight of 5 years of solitude. Wordlessly, Hannah accepted the brooch, her fingers trembling as she pinned it to her collar. The metal warmed quickly against her skin. Thank you for showing me, she said, meeting his gaze, for trusting me with this. Thomas nodded, his eyes holding hers. It's time to let the light back in. As if in response, a breeze stirred the curtains, carrying the scent of rain-washed earth into the long-closed room. Hannah moved to open the window wider, letting the fresh air sweep away the stillness. When she turned back, Thomas was watching her with an expression she had never seen before, as if he were seeing not a ghost of the past, but a possibility for the future. Their hands brushed as they left the room together. The door remained open behind them, no longer a sealed tomb, but simply a room in a house where life might yet go on. Outside, Hannah could hear birds greeting the day after the storm, their songs clear and hopeful in the morning air. Something had been unlocked between them, something far more significant than any door. Hannah touched the silver brooch at her collar, a tangible link between the past and her present. Rebecca's memory would always be a part of this house, a part of Thomas. But perhaps, Hannah thought, there might also be room for new beginnings. Sunday morning found Hannah at her mother's bedside, in the small infirmary Dr. Wallace kept behind his house. The surgery had gone well, the doctor said, but Eliza remained weak, drifting in and out of consciousness. Hannah had barely left her side for 3 days. You should get some air, Dr. Wallace advised, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Your mother will sleep for hours yet. The church service will be starting soon. Reluctantly, Hannah agreed. The walk to the church cleared her head, though her simple dress and hastily pinned hair earned disapproving glances from the matrons of Cottonwood Springs. She touched Rebecca's silver brooch at her collar, drawing strength from it as she slipped into a back pew. After the service, Hannah lingered beneath the cottonwood tree in the churchyard, avoiding conversation. She was about to leave when James Porter approached, his Sunday suit as impeccable as ever. Miss Miller, he said, removing his hat. I was sorry to hear about your mother's condition. How is she faring? Better, thank you, Hannah replied, surprised by his apparent sincerity. Dr. Wallace is hopeful. James nodded, his expression somber. I've spoken with my father about your situation. We would like to help. Hannah stiffened. That's very kind, but we're managing. Are you? James gestured toward the church. I couldn't help but notice you weren't wearing your mother's wedding ring today. I remember how proud she was of it. Heat rose in Hannah's cheeks. That is hardly your concern, Mr. Porter. But it is, he insisted, stepping closer. I care about your welfare, Hannah, more than you realize. Before she could respond, her friend Sarah approached, her face tight with worry. Hannah, a word? James bowed slightly. We'll continue our conversation later, Miss Miller. I have a proposition that might solve all your problems. He walked away, joining his father near their waiting carriage. What did he want? Sarah asked, watching him go. To help, apparently. Sarah lowered her voice. Be careful. The Porters never offer help without expecting something in return. She hesitated. Hannah, There's talk about you spending the night at the Blackhawk Ranch during the storm. Nothing happened, Hannah said firmly. The creek was flooded. I believe you, but others won't. Sarah squeezed her hand. I'm worried for you. Hannah was about to reply when she spotted Thomas across the street at the general store. He rarely came to town, especially on a busy Sunday. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment before he turned away, loading supplies into his wagon. I should go, Hannah said. Mother might be waking. As she crossed the street, James Porter intercepted her, steering her toward the alley beside the store. My proposition, he said without preamble. My father and I will cover all expenses for your mother's care. We will see she has the finest doctors, from Santa Fe if necessary. We'll ensure you have a proper home and a position befitting a lady of your qualities. Hannah frowned. In exchange for what, exactly? Your hand in marriage, James replied smoothly, and your persuasive influence with Blackhawk regarding his land. Hannah stared, momentarily speechless. You can't be serious. Entirely. James's smile never reached his eyes. The Territorial Water Rights Commission is reviewing claims next month. Blackhawk's land controls the headwaters of Jenkins's Creek, water my father needs for our expansion. So you propose to marry me to secure water rights? Hannah's voice rose in disbelief. I propose to marry you because you deserve better than cleaning a half-breed's house and ruining your reputation, James countered. The water rights are simply business. Mr. Porter, our lawyers have already filed challenges to Blackhawk's claim, James continued, cutting her off. As a man of mixed blood with questionable army connections, his hold on that land is tenuous at best. One way or another, we will get what we need. Hannah felt a chill despite the warm day. Is that a threat? A reality. James's voice softened into something more predatory. It doesn't need to be difficult. With your help, he might sell willingly. Without it, he shrugged. The law has ways of resolving such matters. I'll need time to consider, Hannah said, buying a moment to breathe, to think. Of course. James reached for her hand, pressing his lips to her knuckles before she could pull away. But don't take too long. Some opportunities and a man's patience don't last forever. As he walked away, Hannah leaned against the rough brick wall, her mind racing. Across the street she saw Thomas loading the last of his supplies, his expression grim as he watched James rejoin his father. Hannah touched the silver brooch again, feeling trapped between two worlds, the respectable, secure future James offered, and the complicated, deeper connection she felt with Thomas. Both came with consequences she was only just beginning to understand. With her mother's recovery painfully slow, Hannah returned to her work at the Blackhawk Ranch, her mind troubled by James Porter's proposition. The silver brooch, now a permanent fixture on her collar, caught the morning light as she dusted the shelves in the study. You're quiet today, Thomas observed from the doorway. Hannah startled. Just thinking. About your mother? Partly. She hesitated, then decided on the truth. James Porter approached me after church. He offered to pay for my mother's care. Thomas's expression hardened. In exchange for what? Marriage, she said simply. A muscle tightened in Thomas's jaw, but his voice remained even. A respectable offer. The Porters are the most prominent family in the county. He also mentioned your land, Hannah continued. Specifically, the water rights. He said they've filed legal challenges to your claim. Thomas nodded slowly. I received notice last week. The Territorial Commission is reviewing all water claims next month. He moved to the window, looking out toward the northern boundary of his property. The Porters have wanted this land since I bought it. The headwaters of the creek are on my property. James implied your claim might be vulnerable, Hannah said carefully, because of your heritage. A bitter smile touched Thomas's lips. Too Apache for the whites, too white for the Apache. Always caught between worlds. He turned to face her. What did you tell him? That I needed time to consider. Hannah set down her dusting cloth. Thomas, if your legal claim is at risk, it is, he interrupted. I've consulted a lawyer in Santa Fe. My deed is solid, but the Porters have influence with the territorial judge. His eyes met hers, searching. You should consider Porter's offer, Hannah, for your mother's sake. Is that what you want me to do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Instead of answering, Thomas moved to the bookshelf and carefully extracted Rebecca's journal. I've been reading this, he said, for the first time since she died. He opened it to a marked page. She wrote poetry. He read aloud. Two rivers meet, their waters swirl and blend. Though one runs clear, the other dark with earth. Who can say where one current starts to end, or which brings greater value, pain or worth? His voice, normally so pragmatic, softened around the words. She understood what it meant to love across boundaries, he said quietly. Hannah's heart quickened. Thomas, you should learn to ride properly, he said abruptly, closing the journal. If you're going to travel between town and here alone, it's not safe on foot, especially with the Porters watching you. The sudden change of subject left Hannah momentarily confused. I've never ridden anything but Old Betsy from the livery, and only twice at that. I have a gentle mare that would suit you. Thomas's expression softened slightly. We can start this afternoon, if you're willing. Later, in the corral, Hannah stood nervously beside the chestnut mare while Thomas adjusted the stirrups. His hands were steady and sure as he showed her how to mount. Place your foot here, he instructed, cupping his hands to give her a boost. Grip with your knees, not your hands. Hannah wobbled as she settled into the saddle, instinctively clutching the pommel. Thomas's hand came to rest on her knee, gently correcting her position. The warmth of his touch through the fabric of her skirt sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the fear of falling. Relax, he said, his voice low and close. Trust the horse, and she'll trust you. For an hour he led the mare around the corral, his quiet instruction calming her nerves. When she finally managed to guide the horse in a complete circle on her own, her triumphant smile was met with a look of rare, unguarded approval in Thomas's eyes. You're a natural, he said, helping her dismount. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. They stood close, the horse forgotten, the scent of sage and leather that always clung to him filling the space between them. Hannah could feel the steady rhythm of her own heart in the warm afternoon sun. I should check on my mother, she said finally, stepping back as the spell was broken. I'll have the mare saddled for you tomorrow, Thomas nodded. As Hannah prepared to leave, Sarah appeared at the ranch gate, her expression anxious. Hannah, she called out. Thank goodness I found you. I've been looking everywhere. What's wrong? Hannah hurried to meet her friend. It's your mother, Sarah said, glancing nervously at Thomas. She's asking for you, and for him. Hannah turned to Thomas, who was already reaching for his hat. We'll take the wagon, he said, his voice once again that of the practical rancher. It will be faster. As they rode toward town together, the silence heavy with unspoken questions, Hannah couldn't help but wonder what her mother wanted with Thomas Blackhawk, and what she would think of the forbidden feelings growing between them. Dr. Wallace met them at the door of the infirmary, his face grave. "She's weaker," he said quietly to Hannah. "There's an infection setting in. I've done all I can, but she needs stronger medicine than I have." Hannah's stomach tightened with fear. "What medicine? Where can we get it?" "Santa Fe," the doctor replied. "The hospital there has new treatments from back east, but—" He hesitated, glancing at Thomas. "The journey costs money. The medicine costs more. We're talking perhaps another $100. The sum hung in the air like a death sentence. Hannah had nothing left to sell. "I'd like to see her," Thomas said unexpectedly. Dr. Wallace looked surprised but nodded, leading them to Eliza's room. She lay pale against the pillows, her normally vibrant face drawn with pain. Her eyes fluttered open as they entered. "Hannah," she whispered, reaching out a frail hand. Then, seeing Thomas, she added, "Mr. Blackhawk, you came." Thomas removed his hat, standing somewhat awkwardly at the foot of the bed. "Mrs. Miller." "My daughter speaks well of you," Eliza said, her voice surprisingly clear. "Says you've been kind." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "She's a good worker." A faint smile touched Eliza's lips. "More than that, I think." Her gaze moved between them, seeing what neither had fully admitted. "Hannah, would you fetch me some cool water?" When Hannah had left the room, Eliza's expression grew serious. "My daughter has a gentle heart, Mr. Blackhawk. Too gentle for her own good, sometimes." "I've noticed," he replied quietly. "The world isn't kind to gentle hearts," Eliza continued, her fingers plucking restlessly at the blanket. "Especially when they love unwisely." Thomas stiffened. "Mrs. Miller, I don't have time for pleasantries," she interrupted. "I can see how it stands between you. I also know what this town is, what they will do to her if—" She paused, gathering strength. "James Porter has made her an offer." "I know," Thomas said. "It would solve her problems and break her heart," Eliza stated, her eyes sharp and clear in her pale face. "I'm not blind, Mr. Blackhawk." Before Thomas could respond, Hannah returned with the water. Dr. Wallace followed, carrying a letter. "This just arrived," he said, handing it to Hannah. "From the Porter estate." Hannah broke the seal and read quickly, her face growing pale. "It's from James. He says he's arranged for a specialist from Denver to examine Mother. All expenses paid. The doctor will arrive next week." She looked up, her eyes wide with desperation. "He expects my answer to his proposal by tomorrow." Eliza reached for her daughter's hand. "What does your heart tell you, child?" Hannah's eyes flickered to Thomas, then back to her mother. "That I must do whatever it takes to save you." "Even marry without love?" Eliza pressed. "Even that," Hannah whispered. Thomas turned abruptly and strode from the room. Hannah hesitated, torn between her mother and the man retreating down the hallway. "Go," Eliza said softly. "You need to talk." Hannah found Thomas outside, mounting his horse. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "Santa Fe," he replied shortly, not meeting her eyes. "I have business there." "Now? Without a word?" "It's better this way, Hannah. Marry Porter. Save your mother. Have the life you deserve." "The life I deserve?" she repeated, anger rising in her voice. And what life is that, Thomas? One where I'm purchased like cattle for water rights? One where you're respected, he countered, his voice sharp. Not whispered about, not tainted by association with… With what? An Apache? Hannah stepped closer, her hands balling into fists. Is that what you think of me? That I care what they say? You should care. His voice was harsh. I've seen what happens to women who cross those lines. Rebecca. I'm not Rebecca, Hannah cut him off. And you are pushing me away because you're afraid. Thomas finally looked at her, his eyes dark with a storm of emotion. Yes, he admitted quietly. I am afraid. Everyone I have ever loved has suffered for it. My mother's people, when I guided the army. Rebecca, when she married me. My son, who never drew a breath. Hannah's anger dissolved, washed away by the raw pain in his voice. Thomas, I bring misfortune, he continued, his voice flat with conviction. The porters will win. They'll take my land. And if you're tied to me, they will destroy you too. So you would have me marry a man I don't love? She asked, her voice breaking. To protect me from loving you? The words hung between them, the first open acknowledgement of what they both had felt growing for weeks. Thomas's hand tightened on the reins. Yes, he said finally, his voice ragged. For your sake. That is exactly what I want. Without another word, he turned his horse and rode away, leaving Hannah standing alone in the gathering dusk, tears streaming down her face. Inside the infirmary, Dr. Wallace approached with a cup of tea. Your mother is resting, he said gently, and the porters have already paid for her care for the next month. You should consider their offer, Hannah. There aren't many options left. Hannah wiped her tears, straightening her back with a resolve she didn't feel. There's always a choice, Doctor, she said, her voice hollow, even when all the choices hurt. 3 days passed without a word from Thomas. Hannah continued her work at the ranch, the familiar routines a small comfort in his absence. But the house felt profoundly empty, each room haunted by the memory of their growing connection, and each silent corner echoing his last, devastating words. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Hannah found a note folded on the kitchen table, a coffee cup holding it in place. Gone to Santa Fe on business. Miguel Ortiz will watch the horses. Return in 1 week. There was no explanation, no mention of their last conversation. Just practical information, written in his precise hand. Hannah pressed the paper between her fingers, as if she could divine some hidden meaning from the sparse words, from the very fibers of the page. In town, James Porter's patience had worn thin. He cornered Hannah outside the infirmary, his usual smile replaced by a look of thinly veiled irritation. I expected your answer yesterday, he said, dispensing with pleasantries. The specialist arrives from Denver on Monday's stage. I need to confirm the arrangements. I'm still considering, Hannah replied, trying to step around him. James blocked her path. What is there to consider? Your mother needs a treatment that only money can provide. I am offering that money, along with the protection of the Porter name. How generous, Hannah said coolly. Especially since your primary interest is pressuring Thomas Blackhawk off his land. James's expression hardened. That is business, quite separate from my offer to you. Though I do notice Blackhawk has conveniently disappeared just when decisions need to be made. He's in Santa Fe on business, Hannah said, immediately regretting she had revealed even that much. Is he? James raised an eyebrow. Interesting timing. The Territorial Land Commission meets there this week. He adjusted his jacket, a small, smug gesture. No matter. My father's lawyers have already filed our claim. Blackhawk's days as a landowner are numbered. A chill touched Hannah despite the warm day. What do you mean? His deed has irregularities, James said with a smirk. And given his questionable loyalty during the Apache campaigns, the commission will have little sympathy for his case. That's unjust, Hannah protested. He served the Union Army faithfully. Justice has little to do with territorial politics, James replied, his voice hardening. My family built this town, Hannah. We employ half its population. When the Water Commission rules in our favor, Blackhawk will have nothing left to offer you. Hannah met his gaze, her own unwavering. Is that what you think this is about? What he can offer me? Isn't it? James stepped closer, invading her space. What future could you possibly have with him? A half-breed rancher with a tainted past and dwindling prospects. The town already whispers about you. Imagine what they'd say if— I don't care what they say, Hannah interrupted, her voice low but firm. James studied her face and a slow, dawning realization crept into his eyes. My God, he breathed, you've actually fallen for him. He shook his head in disbelief. You'd choose a man who can't even provide for your mother's care over a secure future with me. Before Hannah could answer, Dr. Wallace appeared at the infirmary door. Hannah, your mother is asking for you. Inside, Eliza seemed stronger, a hint of color in her cheeks. Have you made your decision? She asked, patting the bed beside her. Hannah sat, taking her mother's frail hand in her own. I can't marry James Porter, Mother. Not even to save you. To her surprise, Eliza smiled, a look of profound relief on her face. Good. The price would be far too high. Hannah blinked, confused. But your treatment. Eliza squeezed her hand. I have lived my life, child. I will not have you sacrifice yours for a few more months of mine. Don't talk that way, Hannah whispered, tears springing to her eyes. It is the truth, Eliza said simply. Now, tell me, where has your Thomas gone? Santa Fe. On business, he said. Hannah wiped at her eyes. But he left because of me, Mother. Because of what I said. And what did you say? That I love him, Hannah whispered. Or as good as said it. Eliza nodded thoughtfully. And so he ran. Men often do when confronted with feelings they are not ready to face. She smiled faintly. Your father proposed to me 3 times before I finally accepted. He said he needed to be certain he could provide for me properly. Thomas believes he brings misfortune to those he loves, Hannah said. Because of Rebecca. Grief can make cowards of the bravest men, Eliza replied. Give him time. The next morning, Hannah rode to the ranch to find Miguel Ortiz, Thomas's elderly ranch hand, pacing anxiously by the corral. Señorita Miller, he said, sweeping off his hat. A letter came for Señor Blackhawk, from the Army office in Santa Fe. He handed her a thick, official-looking envelope. It looks important. Hannah stared at the wax seal. Whatever Thomas was doing in Santa Fe, it was about more than just the land commission. After ensuring the letter was safely in Thomas's study, she saddled the chestnut mare he had been teaching her to ride. It was time to find out what Thomas Blackhawk was really doing in Santa Fe, and why he had left just when she needed him most. Hannah never reached the city. A mere 10 miles from Cottonwood Springs, she saw a wagon approaching. It was Thomas. He reined his team to a halt, surprise written plainly on his face. "Hannah, what are you doing out here alone?" She brought the mare alongside his wagon. "I was looking for you. A letter arrived from the army office." Thomas's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "I see. What's going on, Thomas? Why did you really go to Santa Fe?" He sighed, gesturing toward a stand of cottonwoods near the creek. "Let's water the horses. I'll explain." Once they were settled in the shade, Thomas retrieved a document from his saddlebag. "I was entitled to a pension," he said, handing it to her. "For my service during the war, I never claimed it." Hannah unfolded the paper, an official notice of back pay and pension entitlement for Thomas Blackhawk, Scout, First Class, Union Army. The sum listed made her breath catch. "Over $300? Thomas nodded. "I didn't want their money, not after what happened with my mother's people. But now?" He met her eyes, and she saw the answer there. "Now there's your mother's treatment." Understanding dawned on her, warm and overwhelming. "The bureaucracy took longer than I expected," he added, his voice gruff with embarrassment. 5 years of an unclaimed pension requires a great deal of paperwork." Hannah stared at him, a war of emotions raging within her. Gratitude, tenderness, and a flicker of anger. "You might have told me." "I wasn't sure it would work," Thomas admitted. "My service record is complicated. There are those who view my actions as betrayal, not duty." "And the land commission?" Hannah asked, remembering Porter's threat. "James said they were meeting this week." "That is also resolved," Thomas said, producing another document. "My deed is solid. Porter's lawyers tried to claim the sale was invalid because of my heritage. But the original owner testified on my behalf. He was my commanding officer during the war." "Rebecca's father," Hannah realized aloud. "He supported you?" Thomas nodded. "Captain Thornton and I have our differences, but he is an honorable man. He came to Santa Fe himself to ensure the commission upheld my claim." Hannah leaned back against the tree trunk, trying to absorb the sudden turn of events. "So the Porters have lost?" "For now," Thomas said grimly. "But men like Porter don't give up so easily. They'll find another way to pressure me." Hannah's hand went to the silver brooch at her collar. "I told James I wouldn't marry him," she said quietly, "before I knew about any of this." Thomas went very still. "That was unwise." "It was honest," she countered. "I couldn't marry him, not when—" She trailed off, unwilling to repeat her confession. Thomas studied her face, something vulnerable and uncertain in his eyes. "Hannah, I—" The distant sound of hoofbeats cut him off. 4 riders were approaching, led by James Porter. "There they are," James called to his companions. He reined his horse to a skidding stop before them, his face flushed with anger. "A touching scene." Thomas rose slowly, positioning himself slightly in front of Hannah. "Porter." James ignored him, his eyes fixed on Hannah. "When you didn't appear at the infirmary this morning, I worried. Imagine my surprise when Dr. Wallace mentioned you had gone looking for Blackhawk." "My business with Mr. Blackhawk is just that. Business," Hannah said firmly. "He's been to Santa Fe regarding his army pension." "His army pension," James repeated with open skepticism. "How convenient. And I suppose that's why you rejected my proposal, for a pittance of a pension?" "I rejected your proposal because I don't love you," Hannah said, rising to stand beside Thomas. James's face darkened with fury. "Love?" he spat. What would a respectable girl know of love for someone like him? Enough, Thomas warned, his voice dangerously quiet. Your little scheme won't work, James continued, turning his glare on Thomas. The territorial governor is a personal friend of my father's. One word from us about your activities during the Apache campaigns. Your threats don't concern me, Thomas interrupted calmly. The Land Commission has ruled. My deed is valid. James smiled, a thin, cruel line. Legal rulings are one thing. Public opinion is another. He turned to his men. Isn't that right, gentlemen? What do you think the good people of Cottonwood Springs would say about a young woman who chooses an Apache over a respectable offer? The men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles, refusing to meet Hannah's eyes. I think, said a new voice, they would say she shows remarkable judgment. Dr. Wallace appeared on the road, riding his old bay gelding. Doctor? James frowned, caught off guard. What are you doing here? Following my patient, Dr. Wallace replied, dismounting with a weary sigh. Miss Miller, your mother asked me to find you. She's quite lucid today and wishes to speak with you. He nodded toward Thomas. With both of you, in fact. Hannah glanced at Thomas, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. We'll come, she said. This isn't over, James warned as they prepared to leave. My father will not stand for this. No, Thomas agreed quietly. I don't believe it is. As they rode toward town, Hannah noticed a thin plume of smoke rising from the direction of the Blackhawk ranch. Thomas, she said, her voice tight with alarm, and pointed. Look! His face hardened as he saw it. Without a word, he urged his wagon team into a gallop, turning toward home. Hannah and Dr. Wallace followed close behind. The barn was already engulfed in flames when they arrived, a roaring inferno against the afternoon sky. It couldn't be saved. By nightfall, only smoldering timbers remained where the sturdy structure had stood that morning. Miraculously, Miguel had managed to free the horses before the roof collapsed, suffering burns on his hands in the process. Kerosene, Thomas said grimly, examining the blackened remains. This was deliberate. Hannah, her dress smudged with soot from helping fight the blaze, nodded. Porter. We can't prove it, Thomas replied, though the certainty in his eyes left no doubt. Dr. Wallace finished bandaging Miguel's hands. I should return to town. Mrs. Miller will be worried. I'll come with you, Hannah said, touching Thomas's arm. We should speak with my mother. Thomas nodded, his face drawn with exhaustion and cold anger. I'll follow after I secure the property. In town, word of the fire had already spread. Whispers followed Hannah and the doctor as they made their way to the infirmary. Outside the general store, Mrs. Porter watched them pass, her thin lips pressed into a line of severe disapproval. Eliza was sitting up in bed when they arrived, her face pale but her eyes alert. I heard about the fire, she said, as Hannah embraced her. Is everyone safe? Yes, though Miguel's hands are burned. Hannah sat beside her mother. The barn is destroyed. Eliza shook her head sadly. Such wickedness, and all for water rights. She took Hannah's hand. Where is Thomas? Securing his property. He'll be here soon. Good. Eliza's expression grew serious. Hannah, I have something to tell you. I've made my decision about the specialist in Denver. Hannah tensed. Mother, I am declining, Eliza said firmly. Dr. Wallace agrees it's my choice. The new treatments might extend my life by a few months, at best. She squeezed her daughter's hand. I have made my peace with God, child. I will not have you or Thomas spend everything on a lost cause. Tears filled Hannah's eyes. It's not a lost cause. Not to me. Listen to me, Eliza said, her voice gaining strength. I have watched you these past weeks. You have found something rare with Thomas Blackhawk, something worth fighting for. Hannah wiped her eyes. He hasn't said, men like him seldom do, Eliza interrupted with a faint smile. But his actions speak clearly enough. She gently touched the silver brooch on Hannah's collar. Rebecca's. Hannah nodded, surprised. How did you know? A woman recognizes these things, Eliza said, leaning back against her pillows. Now go find the marshal. That fire was no accident. Hannah found Marshal Davis in his office, but his response was disheartening. I understand your concern, Miss Miller, he said, avoiding her gaze. But without witnesses, there's little I can do. The timing is hardly a coincidence, Hannah pressed. It happened just after Thomas won his case with the Land Commission. The marshal shifted uncomfortably. The porters employ half this town, Miss Miller, my own deputy included. I need more than suspicion to go on. As a frustrated Hannah left the office, she saw a rider dismounting nearby. He was a stranger, wearing the dusty clothes of a long journey. He took off his hat, revealing features that were vaguely familiar. Excuse me, he said, his Eastern accent distinct. I'm looking for Thomas Blackhawk. Who's asking? Hannah replied cautiously. Robert Thornton, the man said. My sister Rebecca was his wife. Hannah studied him more closely, now seeing the resemblance to the woman in Thomas's photograph. He'll be here soon. I'm Hannah Miller. I work for him. Something in Robert's expression suggested he understood there was more to their relationship. Is the marshal in? Hannah nodded. Though I doubt he'll be of much help. There was a fire at Thomas's ranch today. It was deliberate. Robert's jaw tightened. Then my timing is fortunate. I am a lawyer with the territorial governor's office. Inside, Robert presented credentials that transformed Marshal Davis's reluctance into nervous attention. Governor Wilson sent me to investigate claims of intimidation and corruption in water rights disputes, Robert explained. The Porter situation, specifically. The marshal paled. I assure you, Mr. Thornton, my office can start by investigating today's arson, Robert interrupted firmly. Just then Thomas entered, stopping short at the sight of his brother-in-law. Robert. Thomas. Robert extended a hand. It's been too long. Their handshake was tentative, weighed down by years of shared history. Rebecca's letters, Robert explained. I found them recently. She wrote about the harassment you faced, even back then. When similar reports reached the governor's office, I requested the assignment. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding dawning. The Porters. Among others, Robert confirmed. He turned back to Marshal Davis. I suggest we begin with a visit to the Porter estate. Now. Outside, James Porter was striding toward them, his expression darkening when he saw Thomas. Come to file a complaint, Blackhawk? Accidents happen, you know. This was no accident, Thomas replied evenly. James smirked. Prove it. That, said Robert, stepping forward, is precisely what we intend to do. He presented his credentials. Robert Thornton, Special Investigator, Territorial Governor's Office. I have some questions for you about your family's business practices, Mr. Porter. The blood drained from James's face. My father handles all legal matters. Then I suggest we speak with him immediately, Robert said, his tone leaving no room for argument. As they prepared to leave, Thomas turned to Hannah. Stay with your mother. This could get ugly. Hannah shook her head. I was there today, Thomas. I saw what happened. She stepped closer, her voice low but unwavering. We faced this together. Something shifted in Thomas's expression. Pride, perhaps, or a deeper emotion he wasn't yet ready to name. He gave a single sharp nod and offered her his arm. Together, they followed Robert and the marshal toward the final confrontation with the Porter family. Summer heat shimmered across the valley as Thomas measured lumber for the new addition to his house. 2 weeks had passed, weeks that had transformed Cottonwood Springs. Robert Thornton's investigation had uncovered ledgers documenting years of corruption, bribes, threats, and the illegal diversion of water. William Porter now awaited trial in Santa Fe, while James had fled the territory. The Porters' empire was crumbling, their vast land holdings being divided among those they had wronged. That wall looks crooked, Hannah called from where she sat in the shade, sewing curtains for the new room. Thomas straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. It's the angle you're viewing it from. If you say so, she replied, and the smile she gave him made his heart feel lighter than it had in years. They had settled into an easy rhythm. With her mother's blessing, Hannah had accepted Thomas's proposal, not of marriage, not yet, but of partnership. Eliza would move to the ranch once the room was complete, where Hannah could care for her in comfort. She's asking for you, Dr. Wallace had told Thomas the morning after the Porter's downfall. Eliza wants to speak with you, alone. He had entered her room awkwardly, hat in hand. Sit, she had commanded, patting the bed beside her. I am not long for this world, Mr. Blackhawk, so I will speak plainly. My daughter loves you. Thomas had looked away, unaccustomed to such directness. The question, Eliza had continued, her gaze kind but unwavering, is whether you love her enough to overcome your fear. It's not that simple, he had protested. It never is. You have lost much. So has Hannah. But grief can be a prison, or it can be a passage. The choice is yours. Now, watching Hannah in the dappled shade, Thomas felt something long dormant unfurling inside him. Hope, fragile but persistent. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Miguel rode ahead of several visitors, 2 Apache men and an elderly woman, their horses laden with bundles. Thomas, Hannah said uncertainly. Who are they? Family, he replied quietly. My mother's cousin, Naichi, and her sons. I wrote to them after the fire. Hannah watched as Thomas greeted them in Apache, his gestures compensating where his rusty language skills failed. She saw not the guarded rancher or the haunted soldier, but a man finally, bravely, coming home. Naiche embraced him, a warmth that spoke of deep-rooted affection. Her dark eyes traced the lines of his face, a silent appraisal that ended in a slow, satisfied nod. They brought healing herbs for your mother, Thomas explained, his voice low as he guided Hannah toward them. He paused, a slight hesitation before he continued. And a blessing ceremony. Hannah's brow furrowed. For us? For the house, well, he clarified. If you're willing. Of course, she breathed, her heart swelling at the gesture. It was more than a blessing for a structure. It was a mending of his own heritage, and he was inviting her to be part of it. That evening, as sunset bled across the sky in hues of amber and rose, Nietzsche led them to the edge of the new foundation. The air grew thick with the scent of burning herbs, smoke curling from a small clay bowl. Nietzsche began to speak, her voice a low, resonant chant. The words were a language Hannah's mind could not grasp, but her soul understood. It was the sound of ancient prayers, an invocation for healing, for protection, and for new beginnings. Nietzsche took their hands, placing them one over the other, and bound them loosely with a braided cord of horsehair and plant fibers. As she did, Thomas leaned in, his voice a soft murmur against the twilight. What is broken may be mended, what is lost may be found, what is divided may be united. Tears welled in Hannah's eyes. Nietzsche met her gaze and smiled, her own eyes holding the deep, quiet wisdom of generations. In that moment, the fragile walls between their worlds seemed to dissolve, leaving behind only the simple, profound language of acceptance. Later, as Thomas walked her to the wagon, a companionable silence settled between them. "I've been thinking," he said at last, "about what your mother said, about grief being a prison, or a passage." Hannah remained quiet, giving the words, and him, the space they needed. His next words were quiet, etched with the cost of saying them. "Rebecca, she would have liked you. She believed in second chances." "As do I," Hannah whispered. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing the cool silver of the brooch at her collar. "I've lived in the past for too long, Hannah. I can't promise that I'll ever leave it behind completely, but I'm ready to look forward. With you, if you'll have me." She covered his hand with her own, pressing it to her heart, feeling its steady beat against his knuckles. "I will." The kiss they shared was not one of fiery passion, but of quiet promise. It was gentle, tentative, a beginning, not an end. Behind them, the stone foundation lay solid and waiting, a promise of walls yet to rise, of a life yet to be built. As Thomas helped her onto the wagon seat, Hannah's gaze drifted to the porch. Nietzsche stood there, a still figure in the gathering twilight, her weathered face a portrait of serenity, a silent blessing on their future.